All right, I think we're ready to get started. Hi, my name is Amalia Corby, and I'm here with APA's Public Interest Government Relations Office to start a webinar on a psychologist's introduction to advocacy. Just to let you guys all know, the webinar is being recorded, so just keep that in mind. I believe you're all muted at this time, and we ask you that during the presentation portion to please keep your microphones muted, but we'll have time to ask questions both in the chat box and perhaps through the web as well. So we'll give you a moment. So I'm going to launch into the presentation, turning my camera off because you don't really need to see me while I'm giving a slide presentation. All right, so I'm going to start with just an overview of APA government relations and the type of work that we do and how we make decisions about advocacy. We're going to cover some basics about advocating at the federal level. After that, I'll talk very briefly about other types of advocacy and policy roles at the state and local level. We're going to leave some time for questions at the end, and you can ask about the webinar content or about advocacy in general. We had a couple of polls that I think Rachel's going to put up. The first question that you'll see on your screen should be, do you consider yourself an advocate? And then if you have a moment and you'd like to share, please share any of your past advocacy experience in the chat box. And I'll just pause for a moment while people are responding. Okay, Rachel, do you want to show the, do you want to close the poll?
Yes.
Thanks.
And I am sharing the results with our audience. It looks like about 80% of the audience responded yes, they do consider themselves an advocate, and 20% responded no.
Okay, that's awesome. That's great to hear. So hopefully this will give you maybe a larger window into the advocacy world. I'd also love to hear if you guys are able to type into the chat box or share how you consider yourself an advocate. That'd be great. We'll also have time to talk about that at the end. So just a quick organization chart of APA and APA-PO government relations offices. You guys probably know that the American Psychological Association is divided into different directorates. So we have a government relations office for education, science, public interest, and practice directorates. I'm with public interest. What we do in public interest is we apply psychological science in the public interest and to social justice and human welfare. What we do as government relations officers is to educate. We inform and advise members of Congress and their staff and other members of the policy community. We lobby. So we do direct lobbying on pieces of legislation. We work with our coalitions. And then we also reach out to our membership and members of the public with grassroots lobbying to get you all activated and engaged on the issues. And then we also have a PAC, our APA practice organization, as well as our education directorate have political action committees. Within the Public Interest Government Relations Office, we work on mostly on population-based issues, aging, children, youth, and families, criminal justice, violence prevention, and women's issues, as well as all the other issues that you see listed on your screen. We do that based on what's happening at the federal level, what's happening in Congress, what people are talking about, things that happen, for example, like mass shootings. When a mass shooting happens, there's always a lot of media attention and congressional attention to issues of violence prevention, and so our activism and our advocacy on those issues usually ramps up around those times. So when we think about developing our APA advocacy agenda, and this applies to any organization as well, so these are really good guidelines to think about as far as what you plan to do and want to do in your careers and also personally. We think about the consistency with APA's mission and strategic plan, whether our members have recognized expertise on a policy issue. With 117,000 members, there's a lot of expertise on many, many issues, and so we try to engage as many people as we can when talking about policy with Congress. We think about the uniqueness and importance of psychology's contribution, the support of our governance and membership, prospects for success. That's a big deal, especially right now when we're dealing with a new Congress, a new administration. People have a lot of concerns about what actually is going to happen this year, and if any legislation is going to pass other than some sort of healthcare reform and maybe tax reform. And then we think about the availability of resources. While we do have quite a few government relations officers on staff at APA, I think there are like 20 of us, it's still not enough to cover all of the issues that we think are worthy of our attention and that our members think are worthy of our attention. So just some real basic information on advocacy as we move forward. So advocacy is communicating with decision makers on an issue of concern or interest in order to exert influence on the decision-making process. So while I talk about Congress and working at the federal level, because that's my job, advocacy is something that you can apply much more globally, and I want you to sort of think about advocacy in your daily lives, what you can do to sort of have a positive impact on what some may consider to be small things, but really can build up to something larger. We have the right to advocate, and don't forget that. It's in the Constitution. So Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise therefore, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. So when you're thinking about your advocacy as a professional or as an individual, think about what the issue is. What are you concerned about? What are you emotionally invested in? Where do you have expertise as a professional? Or where do you have a personal interest or personal story? Think about who has the authority to grant your request. So there are different powers assigned to different levels of government. Sometimes you will email or call your member of Congress and they'll say, we can't do anything about that because we have no jurisdiction over that. So you have to think about, well, who is the right person to talk to about this? And government is so big, it's kind of hard to know sometimes. And so that's where, as a professional, your government relations office can come in and help you out with some of those issues. Then you identify the appropriate approach to be taken. Think about what the best way is to communicate your message. Oops. There you go. Talk a little bit. I'll come back to that and framing your message and making decisions about the audience for your message in a moment. I'm going to talk about the U.S. Congress first very briefly. So this is a bill sitting on Capitol Hill. You probably all remember how a bill becomes a law from your 6th grade or 7th grade civics class. This is just a review. We'd like to keep in mind that there are lots of opportunities for intervention, but the best time to really have the most influence on a piece of legislation is at the beginning of the process. So once you develop a relationship with your member of Congress and bring issues to their attention, if it's something that they care about and they think that can be actionable and something that can be worked on in Congress, and then they are more likely to create a bill on it. Once the bill is written or in draft form, it gets introduced, goes through the committee process, gets voted out of committee, and then it is debated sometimes, depending on the rules, and then it's passed and goes to the president. And so at every step of the way, there's an opportunity for the bill to change and to become something different, and sometimes those changes are positive and sometimes they're not so great. Another opportunity for intervention is during the annual federal budget process. Every year, APA submits a list of priorities for the committees to consider. And these are things that have been identified by APA governance or members as things that we really need to have funded, both to advance human welfare and also to get funding for our psychologists, both in services and in research positions. I like to show people these slides just so that you get a sense of what Congress looks like. I think it's, as a woman, I think it's sort of fascinating that there are only 104 women in Congress out of 535 representatives total. There are not very many minority members of Congress, so thinking about people of color and how they're represented or not represented at the federal level. So Congress, I mean, while they are the people's representatives, they don't necessarily, they don't always appear to represent the people in their makeup. This slide sort of talks a little bit more about those issues. So there are 7 LGBT members, or members who identify as LGBT, and 39 total non-Christian members. So I have another quick poll that Rachel's going to put up. Do you know your member of Congress? And it's not meant to like make you feel bad if you don't, because a lot of people do not, or they only know like their senators or some of their representatives in their state, but maybe not their own representative. So just curious. And if you don't, I have some handy dandy web addresses on the screen to help you identify who your members are. Rachel, do you want to check the results?
I sure do.
Okay.
So it looks like of the people who participated, 59% do not know they're members of Congress and 41 do know they're members of Congress.
Okay. Oh, well then definitely. Please write down these web addresses, or if you get bored while I'm talking, click on those addresses and look your members up. Sometimes you'll recognize the name, you'll be like, oh yeah, and sometimes you won't. I don't live in Wisconsin anymore, but I'm from there, and my family's from there, and there was an issue that my sister was having a few months ago, and I was like, oh, you should contact your member of Congress about this, and she's like, you mean Paul Ryan? And I was like, no. Remember, so I had her look it up and identify who the person was and helped her write a letter. I don't think she received any results from it, but I think the exercise was important, just to sort of see that you can reach out and sometimes you do get a positive response. So this shows you a little bit of the difference between the House of Representatives and the Senate. Senators are generally the more pragmatic of the bunch, and they have, I guess, a bit more gravitas. There are fewer senators. They tend to stick around longer and be reelected more often. They have a larger constituency, however, and they are generalists, so they rely more heavily on their staff. And staffers on the Senate side are generally more mature and, again, stick around longer than staffers on the House side. So it's really important to develop relationships with them. Of course, they're harder to reach. Members of the House of Representatives, as you know, there are more representatives, so you're more likely to get personal attention to your issue, but it's less likely that your members are going to have power to address the issue. Oops. Sorry, slid through. So here are some of the ways that you can communicate with your member of Congress. Oh, my apologies for this slideshow. There's something weird going on. Okay. So indirect communication. So you can indirectly communicate about an issue by talking about it publicly. So it should say news articles, not new articles. Letters to the editor, op-ed articles. These are things that we actually, as government relations staff, sometimes we write these for our CEO. But these are things that you as an individual and as a professional can certainly write on your own to your local paper or even a national publication. And you'd probably have as a psychologist, I feel like you all have a pretty good chance of getting some attention to your issues. Press releases are another way that we communicate as an association. Blog posts, I'll show you the, oh, somebody lost sound. If anybody else is having trouble hearing, please let us know in the chat box. Okay. So you can communicate by blogs, either on your personal blog or again on a professional blog, and a website. If you're really interested in an issue, you can certainly form a website on it. Two things that aren't mentioned on here, and I'll touch on very briefly, are tweeting and posting on Facebook. I think it's always important to be mindful when posting on social media. There's a lot of information out there, and I guess it makes sense to be careful about how you talk about an issue. I think when we raise issues in a very partisan and one-sided manner, and I'm certainly guilty of it myself, it tends not to give you any credibility with the opposition, and it makes people more hesitant to even think about your side of the issue. Whereas if you're approaching it from a framing perspective or from an educational perspective, people feel a little bit more, I guess, willing to listen to what you're saying. So indirect communication is a really good way to do that because it's non-confrontational, and people can choose to read it or to ignore it. Well, here we go again. Let's see, one-way communication. Sending emails to your representative. They get a lot of email, but if you feel strongly about an issue and you get an action alert either from us or from another organization, it always makes sense to click and to fill that action alert out. It takes a few seconds. Sending letters, formal letters. I think not too many people do this anymore, and if you're sending a letter to the Senate or the House of Representatives, it won't get open for months because of the screening processes. But I know that since the election, at least in the DC area, a lot of people have been organizing postcard writing campaigns. So that's one way to do it. Postcards don't have to be screened as heavily, and you can also send them to your member's district office. Phone calls are a great way to get your message across. Basically, the person answering the phone will listen to what you have to say, and they will note, probably on some sort of tally sheet, your feelings about either the issue or the piece of legislation, and then they'll provide a summary at the end of the day to their member of Congress of what they're hearing about and whether they're hearing good things or bad things. And then social media, I already mentioned. Two-way communication. Visiting your member on Capitol Hill, going to town hall meetings, which I'm sure you've heard lots about in the papers lately, with which you can have varying degrees of success. Attending congressional hearings. As part of the Government Relations Office, we identify APA members to go and testify before Congress, and that's always a rewarding experience for everyone. Congressional briefings, either through us or another organizations. Site visits, where you invite the member of Congress to visit you at your lab or place of business, and then in-district visits, where you can go to their district office. These are some fairly recent pictures of visits that we've done on Capitol Hill, people meeting with their members or with staffers. It's always a rewarding experience if we can actually train you guys in person and take you up to Capitol Hill. Let's see. Oh, and here's some pictures from congressional committee hearings. Dr. Devoskin testified on suicide prevention a couple of years ago, and here's our now CEO Arthur Evans. I believe he testified about behavioral health services in Philadelphia a couple years back. So again, going back to the chart that I showed you guys before, there are many opportunities to influence Congress throughout the process. And there are many ways to keep up with the news on Capitol Hill. You're all familiar with your regular news sources, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, etc. There are a lot of politics-focused resources out there. This is not super out of date, but not super up to date either. So C-SPAN is, a classic. It's good to keep on in the background. It broadcasts a lot of congressional hearings and events. The Hill is online and has a lot of DC-based news. Roll Call, National Journal, and Politico are also all good sources. I'm going to take a break now and go into the chat box because I saw a couple of questions. Let's see. Okay, with some information on people's past advocacy, which is awesome. Thank you, Rachel, for providing that resource. I didn't know that existed, so that's very cool. I'll look it up. And is it worth contacting representatives to speak out about an executive order? Might they learn that an order is unpopular and work to counter it in the future? I think it's worth contacting them to express their concern. Some recent executive orders have received a very public response from a lot of organizations, including us. And I think there are some members of Congress that are reacting to the executive orders. They're mainly Democratic members of Congress, but those are going to be the people who are going to be very active on these issues. So the executive order that came out like 2 weeks ago now, the religious freedom one, did have some concerning language. Well, it had quite a bit of concerning language for a lot of people, but there was specifically some people are concerned about LGBT populations as well as access to reproductive health services. And a number of members of Congress have introduced a bill to protect access to those services. So it's certainly worth reaching out and seeing if they will do something about it, or just to express your concern generally about the rights of yourself or other populations. Okay, moving along. So if you're interested in locating a federal bill, congress.gov is a really easy to use website. You just go to current legislation and you can type in a keyword like trafficking, human trafficking. You can find out all the current legislation on that topic, and you can see who is working on it. Regulations, I'm not talking too much about federal agencies in this webinar, but that's another way to influence the political process and to advocate for an issue. A lot of the work of the government is done through regulations. So if you hear something coming out and you want to weigh in, you can go to regulations.gov, search for the order, and if the public comment period is open, you can certainly write your own comments. If there's something that you guys feel APA should be weighing in on, that's when you contact me or other government relations personnel, and we can figure out if there's time or the energy and willingness within the organization to weigh in on an issue, and then we can work on some comments as well. Personally, I worked on comments on postpartum depression screening a couple of years back, and I feel like our input into the process really showed when the final regulations came out, and so it's something we were all pretty proud of. Email, again. So again, the easiest way, the lowest energy way to advocate is to sign up for our alerts and others. So I think you can see the website on your screen, but it's cqrengage.com/APA policy. And if you go to that website and register, if you haven't already, then you can sign up and get action alerts either from us in public interest or our science colleagues or our education colleagues. We try not to send too many, 2 or 3 per month, on issues that are really important to the association. This picture is old and everybody looks bored in the picture, but really sitting down with your member of Congress is a great way to go if you can get your foot in the door. So things that you can ask a legislator to do. You can ask them to introduce or co-sponsor legislation. You can ask them to vote for a particular piece of legislation. You can ask them to circulate or sign a Dear Colleague letter, which will influence other members of Congress to vote a specific way on a piece of legislation. Talk to your local media about a certain issue, and you can ask them to visit your program or institution. Asking them to visit you really helps form a personal relationship both with the member and their staff. So basically what you do, and you can contact your member through their website, or if you have a personal connection, by all means use that. But you can coordinate it with your member's scheduler. Make sure you notify people within your institution that that you have made the invitation and that it's moving forward. Try to coordinate the visit with other local events. So if you are interested in doing something during Child Abuse Prevention Month, then mention that when you're trying to make the appointment and try to coordinate it with other things that might be going on. That'll increase your chances of getting some publicity as well. And then invite your members of your local press to attend so you can get the word out about the good work that you do. This is a good way to talk about phone calls, but it also works in person too, and we'll repeat this in just a moment. So when you call your member of Congress or anyone, you introduce yourself, talk about why you're calling. If you have any stories or information about the issue and you have time, feel free to share that. I would not spend too much time on that because I don't think that the staffer is going to be writing any detail down. Request the member's support for an issue or a piece of legislation, and then make sure you thank them because it's often a thankless job to answer the phones all day. Congressional visits. These are from, I really love these pictures. So every year we train the Leadership Institute for Women in Psychology on advocacy, and we take them up to the Hill. And this past year, our members had a lot of meetings with their members of Congress. So here you have Senator Tammy Duckworth and Senator Dick Durbin meeting with an APA member. And here you have Senator Claire McCaskill meeting with 2 other APA members at her office. And I think they had a breakfast coffee together, which is super cool. So when you're preparing for a congressional meeting, introduce yourself, talk about the purpose of your visit. Again, anecdotal information, talk about stories, things that affect you personally, or things that affect your patients if you're a clinician. And that's where you can also provide expert information. Say, this issue is happening to my clients and I see it a lot. This is how it's affecting them. Like this is, as a psychologist, this is what I'm seeing. And then you summarize your key points, and then you request support for the program that you're asking for, or again, the legislation or the funding. And then you thank them when you're done. So there are 3 parts to your message. The first one is your hook. I'm a constituent, which, the subtext of that is that you're a voter. The line, the reason that you're here, again, your story and your expert information. And then the thinker. What do you want from this visit? What are you asking them for? This is one example. It's from our education colleagues, but it certainly applies to many contexts. So basically this person introduces herself, talks about her professional affiliation and why she's there to talk. The line, so this is about GP specifically. Having a personal story to add to this line would be also wonderful. And then the thinker is, asking for a specific dollar amount for a specific year for a specific program. So when you're interacting with legislators and staff, both at the state and federal and local levels, um, mention what you do, that you're a constituent, compliment their work, be positive and brief, ask for their support. Don't underestimate the staff. The staff will be young. They're all probably in their early 20s. And it can seem surprising to some people that these people are writing our nation's laws and proposed laws, but they're all incredibly smart and they work really, really hard for some pretty demanding bosses. Don't overestimate the influence of the data. I'm an epidemiologist by training, so I definitely think about the data all the time, but the personal story is really what's going to get the attention of the staffer. Don't forget you're the expert and the voter. So when you're done, write a thank you, email, keep up your contact. You know, don't send stuff every day, but certainly follow up periodically if you have something to share with the staffer, and encourage your colleagues to do the same. So this is just a quick review of how a bill becomes law. These are all the different points where things can get kind of mixed up and messed up. So down in the right corner, you see what the taxpayer really wanted. And there you see what actually happened, went through the process and got funded or was not funded. And I would say that this is a pretty accurate representation based on some of what we've seen. So state level advocacy. This content is pretty much the same. So you're going to be talking with staff who are not just there to work on issues, which is what the DC-based staff are, but the people in the district are really there to handle constituent issues and constituent requests. So that can be good or bad depending on what you want to talk about. So the same thing, gather specific information on the issue. Definitely, if there's local level data, you know, they're going to want to know why why this issue matters. Compelling data and anecdotes, make them aware of the issue. District staff may not know that an issue is important, so make sure that they are aware of what's going on. And then prepare for opposition, which makes sense in any context. Always be professional and nice, but also prepared to make a strong argument. Advocating in coalitions, this is something that we do at the federal level as representatives of APA, but this is something that you can do at the local and state level if you don't already. So if you think about some of the work that you do on campus and working with other departments and all of the opportunities for student leadership, I think you can translate that into a professional context as well. Thinking about leaders or people at your level that are working in other organizations where you can really go out and represent the beliefs of your work and your beliefs and have a coordinated front. So this is basically, I think I went through most of my slides, and I wanted to sort of throw out a question to you all, asking you, how can you help make sure psychology is at the table? And I think to sort of frame that discussion, you can think about your political circles of influence. And I mean, in this picture, the member of Congress is at the middle, but think about yourself. And so if you're at the middle, like, who do you want to influence, and how do you reach them, and how do you talk to them about the issues? So yeah, so if you can, let me go back to this question. How can you help make sure psychology is at the table? I think we had another poll question, Rachel, that basically says the same thing. So if folks want to answer in the chat box, that would be wonderful.
I am launching the poll now.
Thank you. And I can also take any other questions right now. Do we have any responses?
I'm not seeing any written responses in the chat box,
Okay.
but if our audience members could take some time to write up a little something, we would love to hear what you have to say. I think now they're rolling in.
Okay, yeah, I see a couple of responses here. So we have to be sure to be aware and participate in advocacy efforts. I agree, and I know it's hard to be on top of everything with all of the things that we have to juggle as humans, as professionals, as individuals. So yeah, so even if if you want to advocate, but you only feel like you can do the bare minimum, like make a phone call on an issue, or click on the email when you get it, I think that's great. Let's see, next comment was, I think having programs encourage and teach how to have individuals engage. I think that's important. I think a culture of engagement is wonderful. I do think that the political discourse right now in the country is not, it's not great. It's not at the level that you'd want it to be, but I think people are having important conversations, and at least we're thinking about how other people are thinking about issues. That was good. Yeah, attend local meetings, advocate for vulnerable populations, particularly for their psychological well-being, because legislation can directly or indirectly affect that. Absolutely. That's what we do in the public interest directorate, but again, there's only a few of us. And I can actually, so I'll give you guys one example since we have a little bit of time left. So some of the work I've been doing for the past year or two with one of my colleagues is on gender responsive justice. And this issue came to our attention because we have a member in Minnesota who was doing research on the prison doula program at Shakopee State Prison. And it's fascinating. So they're talking about how these women go in and help incarcerated women through their labor and delivery. And these are women who would otherwise not be allowed to have anyone in the delivery room with them. The father's not allowed. Other relatives can't be there. So this person is really truly alone in that sense with their correctional officers and then the medical personnel. So thinking about all of the issues that are wrapped up in that, a lot of these women were shackled or restrained when they were in labor. The health care that they're receiving is unknown in many circumstances. So we worked with a few members of Congress last year to develop legislation and think about having a ban nationally on the use of shackles and heavy restraints on pregnant women. And it was modeled a lot on what our member in Minnesota did. So we were able to get some attention to the issue, but the bill that our language was in never got passed. So this year, when the new Congress started up, we had two members of Congress contact us and say, hey, we want to work on this issue again. We want to write legislation. And so everything that we did last year and the year before is being put into a new piece of legislation that will be introduced hopefully sometime this summer. And so these are things where if you all are doing good work and you have a strong connection with us or other associations and it gets noticed and it has a policy, it's applicable in a policy context, then we can really make it go places. Another thing that is on your screen right now that you might want to think about is applying for a congressional or executive branch fellowship, where we bring APA members to DC for a year to work in an executive branch agency or to work on the Hill with a member of Congress. And it's generally mid-career psychologists that the program has been geared toward in the past, but I would say we've seen the full range. And lately, Many of the fellows have actually been early career. You can also blog for us. If you have a blog idea either on your work or on a policy issue and you want to talk about it, please feel free to reach out. And the website for that is psychologybenefits.org. Yes. Answering the question in the chat box, will the webinar be taped and slides shared for future reference? Yes, the webinar is being recorded and we will share the slides. And you can feel free to reach out to me if you have follow-up questions as well. Yep, you can make your colleagues and fellow students aware of urgent issues, clicking, calling something, yep, pretty much anything. Include a major advocacy assignment to help students build the skills for advocacy issues of their concern. Well, I know Rachel's going to put a plug in for another related webinar, but I will also put a plug in for a webinar that I'm doing for Division 17. So it's Division 17, 2735, and then our early career office next month. We're going to be doing almost the same thing, but then talking a little bit more about policy careers, if we have time to fit it in. And then at the end, there will be an assignment of sorts in which I will give people the option to contact their member of Congress and provide you with the script and the text for that. So I'll make sure that everyone who signed up for this webinar also gets an invitation to that webinar as well. You want to go ahead, Rachel?
I do, yes. Thanks, Amalia. I thought I saw in the attendee list that Brianna French was with us. So Brianna, if you want to write a comment, I would be happy to give more information about the webinar that you have organized. I think it will be related to psychology and advocacy with the current political administration. They haven't selected a date yet, but it will be coming up next month, so I encourage everybody to keep their eyes and ears open for that. I'd also like to just make a small plug for those members who are watching and listening today from APA Division 17. Any students or faculty members, there is student affiliates of Division 17, or SAS as we call it. So that's the student organization. One of the pillars is social justice, and I am one of the co-chairs on there, along with some of my colleagues here at Ball State. We're the host institution for the next 2 years. So if you're trying to find people to get in touch with or other ways to get involved, I would really strongly encourage you to reach out to us here at Ball State. We would love to hear from you and we would love to work with you. And thank you so much to Amalia for putting on this webinar today and for giving us such great information and some practical ways that we can advocate for ourselves and use our skills and training in psychology. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you all. And I'll just put up my email real quickly. In case you guys have any follow-up questions, please feel free to email and I will get back to you as soon as I can. All right, well, I think we can wrap up. Thank you all.
I think so. Thank you, everyone, for coming.